more@schwab.com.
From Marketplace, I'm Sabri Benishore in for David Brancaccio. The S&P 500 officially hit correction territory yesterday. That just means it's come down 10% from its last high. But markets, even the S&P 500, are not the economy. They are a sign of how investors feel about the future earnings of publicly traded companies in general. If you want to know how the rest of America is feeling, and in particular how low-income Americans are feeling, you could look to Dollar General. Its CEO, Todd Vasos, said in its earnings call this week that its core customers, these are people who earn under $40,000 a year, are struggling even more. Customer traffic fell last quarter. Marketplace's Kaylee Wells has more.
Dollar General's customers are struggling and end-of-month store sales are slowing, says retail analyst Matt Todd with S&P Global.
Lower-income households who are their core customer are running short on cash.
Plus, there's inventory loss. Something called shrink is high.
Elevated shrink, I think, is another sign of people struggling at the lower end of the income spectrum. Third-party theft is the largest component of it, people stealing things.
Dollar General's CEO said customers have already cut out discretionary purchases. Now they're going without some basic necessities, too, partly by having a more strict definition of necessities.
The more income you have, the more we tend to consider things as necessities.
Nick Pretnar is with the Laboratory for Aggregate Economics and Finance at UC Santa Barbara. He says take something like fabric softener. Higher income consumers might call that a necessity.
But someone who is lower income, they're going to cut out something like fabric softener more quickly than, say, they cut out laundry detergent.
Pretnar says Dollar General won't want to absorb price increases from tariffs, which means price-sensitive consumers who shop there might bear a higher share of that burden this summer. I'm Kaylee Wells for Marketplace.
All right, let's do the numbers. Dow, S&P, and NASDAQ futures are all up in the 4 to 0.8% range, with Dow futures up 152 points. The price of gold is just north of $3,000 an ounce. That's the first time that's happened ever. Gold is where investors sometimes put their money when they are too worried to put it anywhere else. And you know what else is considered a safe place for money? 10-year Treasury bonds. Investors have been piling into those over the past few months. The yield on the 10-year Treasury is now at 4.31%.
Marketplace Morning Report is supported by The Economist, devoted to providing independent journalism that makes sense of the news shaping the world. More at economist.com or with The Economist app, newsletters, and podcasts. And by Progressive Insurance. Progressive is looking for individuals who want to join an inclusive and unique culture. More information, including application, at progressive.com/careers.
Now we return to our Odd Job series. What's that like? In today's edition, we will hear from a vintage race car mechanic, Nick Palomini. He works at GMT Racing in Connecticut, where he preserves old race cars.
I actually had one guy that was in the aerospace industry, and he's like, I've met fighter pilots, and I think you have a cooler job. I'm like, I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, but thank you anyway. My name is Nick Palomini, and I work on vintage race cars. Whatever car it is, it's about understanding where it fit in racing history. What was this car's purpose? And then trying to rebuild it to embody that and make it reliable by today's standards. A lot of these cars were meant to be used for a racing season. Today, we have to make them last for year after year after year. It's interesting to see how the engineers thinking about how to go about certain things has evolved over the years, and having to remember that each of these vehicles, even though it looks archaic by today's standards, it was pushing the limit of what was possible in its day. We source parts from all over the world. Some of the ignition systems we use are manufactured in Australia. We have engine builders all over the country. We know where to get parts in England and other places in Europe. A lot of the things sometimes you just can't get at all, and we can make a lot of the parts. We have a whole rack of metal to various specs, and then we just pull what we need, cut it to length, weld it up. We have a full machine shop that we can make pretty much whatever we need. And whatever we can't make, we know who can. We have a whole host of clients that bring us their vintage race cars. We generally house them at our shop, and we have a huge storage building as well. So before each event, we load the cars in the trailers and we show up at the track. Sometimes some of the vehicles, it's difficult to belt yourself in, so we help the drivers get situated in the vehicle. Sometimes we'll communicate with them on the radio set, basically make sure that they have an enjoyable weekend at the race. When we ran races in Australia and New Zealand, we put everything into a shipping container and discovered that we were actually able to track the shipping container. The overseas stuff, we don't do that often, and the customers are generally fairly involved with making sure that that happens. We have a set fee for transporting, like in the country, where it's, X amount per mile. And then for each crew member, it's X amount per day. We have more work than we can do, really. So in that sense, there's more than enough customer interest in what we do. I mean, there's been doomsayers since the 70s and 80s. There are challenges in the industry going forward as far as getting newer people, younger people into it. A lot of that, I think, personally, is down to cost. It's not a cheap hobby to get into. And that's, at the end of the day, that's what it is, as a hobby. I think fascination with actual machines is not going to go away, no matter how many screens are put in front of young people. There's enough variety out there, I think, of people's experiences. It's never going to be like it was in the heyday of, 50s, 60s, even the 90s of car culture. I don't think. It'll change, and we just have to change with it.
I know some of you out there have some pretty wild jobs. So if you are in a unique line of work and want to share, please do. Send us an email, morningreport@marketplace.org. We would love to hear from you. Our executive producer is Kelly Silvera. Our digital producer is Dylan Nietinen. Our engineers are John Brewington and Becca Weineman. In New York, I'm Sabri Benishore with the Marketplace Morning Report. From APM, American Public Media.
WNY